Welcome, lovely chosen ones. When you live so cleanly that even an inquiry turns into a fan club gathering, you know your opponents are in trouble. Let's begin with this disturbing reality. More than half of personal character assaults are motivated by private jealousy rather than public proof. And in your situation, you picked one. They sent someone to dig dirt on you, and the shovel broke in half. They attempted to create a case. They were prepared for the fall. They had popcorn, fake tears, and a screenshot folder. However, when the investigator performed what investigators do and interviewed genuine individuals who knew you, he did not uncover any secrets. He discovered supporters, not skeletons in the closet, but neatly arranged garments and receipts of honesty. Imagine their expressions when they realized, oh sure, they were the most consistent and courteous individuals I've ever worked with. Never provided drama. Always focused. A story surprise involving rare breeds. They send someone to damage your reputation. Instead, they unwittingly increased your reputation. What you're going to learn is how this whole spiritual monitoring operation went so wrong that it set the whole plot on fire. Buckle up, because this isn't just rumor. This is divine proof that your light enters rooms even when you are not there. And for those who attempted to destroy you, let's just say they tried to murder your character but ended up testifying on your side. Let's break it all down. Number 1, they prayed for dirt, but you were dirt-free. They were trying to find something nasty about you. Anything that might tarnish your reputation and fuel the rumors. They spread discreetly behind your back. It wasn't simply curiosity. It was a setup, a character assassination effort disguised as concern or background checks. They want you to discover anything they can use against you. Old drama and unscrupulous actions. A fracture in your constancy. But they didn't bank on you really living the life you claimed to live. You were not out here appearing to be pure while being crazy behind closed doors. You did not just withstand storms. You kept them clean. The persons they questioned were meant to expose you. That was the whole idea. Instead, those same folks talked highly of you. They weren't attempting to defend you. Your life had already spoken for itself. You've been the same person both publicly and privately. You've been really courteous and grounded even when no one was watching. That's what irritated them, since you were meant to offer them something to work on. A fault, a controversy, a problematic text, or a dodgy transaction. However, when the investigator went out to inquire, he only found consistency. That burnt them more than anything else because they've been constructing a quiet narrative that you're not as good as you look, that there's something wrong with you. But when the reality entered the room, it shattered the illusion in seconds. People who knew you, even from a distance, could not support the folly. All they could reply was nope. They've always been solid. They were searching for dirt. However, there was none. Just the earth you grew in. That is why they are furious. Not because someone lied for you, but because no one needed to. The positive gossip was not created. It was earned. You did not tidy up for the inquiry. You were already alive, correct? This is the type of truth that makes opponents uncomfortable. Because it signifies that the one thing they expected to be your demise was never true in the first place. Now they're uncomfortable because their whole strategy was based on the notion that you were faking it, which you weren't. That isn't only frustrating for them. That is terrible. Number 2, the streets shouted louder than the secrets. They believed the streets would reflect their lifestyles. They thought that the rumors they began in secret had traveled far enough to remain in your name in public. However, when a neutral, actual investigator began questioning around, things did not go as planned. The streets did not confirm the drama. The streets revealed the truth because they forgot you had made a subtle effect in areas they never looked. You weren't just showing up at work or with buddies. You were leaving imprints. They were solid, genuine, and unaffected by rumor. People who have seen your actions, who have seen you handle oneself with elegance, humility, and maturity. Those folks spoke out when it mattered. Nor because you asked, nor because they were attempting to defend you, but because true recognition is real. They told the investigator what they knew. You were neither dirty or hazardous. You were not what they had heard. You were focused. You were courteous. You moved with honesty even when no one was looking. And then the whole false tale crumbled. That's when the folks who began the falsehoods became irate. Not because someone defended you, but because too many others refused to accept their illusion. They were counting on quiet or shadowy echoes, but what they received was a wall of reality that they couldn't overcome. The streets did not just fail to validate their falsehoods. They did the reverse. They testified. And when that type of raw, unexpected reality comes in, it impacts harder than any speech you could have given. You've got individuals out here that hardly engage with you, yet have positive things to say. That's the type of influence you have. It's not loud, but it lasts. The same places that attempted to bury your name are now celebrating your character. That is spiritual justice in action. And now they're outraged. Not only have they lost control, but their lives have been overtaken by reality that cannot be erased. They underestimated your impact in ordinary situations. They expected rumor to speak louder than your legacy. Except the streets conveyed the whole tale, leaving them with nothing to stand on except their resentment. Number 3, the silent witnesses had nothing negative to say. Some individuals felt your quiet indicated you had something to conceal. They believed that if they probed deeply enough, queried the proper individuals, or put pressure on the silent ones, the truth would eventually out and it would be unpleasant. What they didn't anticipate was that even those who didn't like you had nothing negative to say. That is how scarce your energy is. Even those who never clicked with you couldn't argue that you never gave them a legitimate excuse to talk. For the quiet colleague who kept to themselves, the classmate you seldom talked to, the ex-friend who drifted away. Not on horrible terms, but not on good ones either. These were the ones they hoped would reveal something, anything. But when the inquiries came, none of them could claim you were careless. None of them could call you dodgy. The most they could say was, they kept to themselves. So we didn't say much, but they were always courteous. That's what shook them. Because it's not fortunate when even those who don't agree with you can't sign off on a falsehood. That is constancy. You've been so grounded in your truth and disciplined in your character that even those who don't agree with you will not lie to you. That is the sort of reputation that cannot be faked or rushed. You have to live it every day, when no one is looking, no one is applauding, and no one is giving you the benefit of the doubt. The folks who attempted to tarnish your name believed they had backup. They anticipated that once the investigator contacted them, there would be murmurs and side remarks supporting the slander. However, they were left unsatisfied. Nobody backed it up because, although you are not perfect, you have been honest, courteous, and kept your lane clean. This left them with nothing to twist. What truly infuriated them was how even those they expected to bolster their cause ended up discreetly confirming yours. They were not prepared for it. They weren't expecting neutrality to shift in your favor. And now they're furious. Not because you defended yourself, but because you never needed to. The truth stood up for you without saying anything. Number 4, their wrath is not related to the news. It's about the mirror. They assumed this probe would shed light on you. What they didn't realize was that the same light would shine on them when the investigator began digging for dirt. All they found was validation of your progress, honesty, and consistency. And with each kind word spoken about you, something deep inside them snapped. Because the truth wasn't simply clearing your reputation, it was also exposing theirs. What enraged them wasn't only the fact that the report came back clear. It was that you returned clean. There will be no slip-ups, a messy history, or a path of ruin. They hoped that if someone looked closely, they'd discover a version of you that matched the one they saw in their minds. The harsh, phony, and problematic version they had projected onto you. But the inquiry showed how little of it was true, and how much was just their own reflection. You turned into a mirror. Every comment about your character reminded them of the qualities they'd refused to acquire. Every tale of how you managed pressure, kept calm in the midst of mayhem, and remained courteous even when provoked. It all revealed aspects of themselves that they had previously hidden or ignored. That's what made them so upset. It was not about justice or the truth. It was about ego. The more people saw your light, the more they were left in the dark with their own decisions. They were not prepared for that kind of exposure. They weren't expecting the probe to come back on them. But that is what occurs when your life is lived. In reality, it begins to disclose everything around it. They asked for an audit, which morphed into a reflection. And now they're not just upset with you. They are unhappy with themselves since it is difficult to continue lying when the person you attempted to pull is clean and you are the only one coated in mud. You didn't just endure the setup. You demonstrated what responsibility looks like without uttering a word. And the mirror did not lie. Number 5. They didn't just lose control. They lost the narrative. They were certain they had you cornered. Not physically, but socially, psychologically, and emotionally. They did not need to combat you personally. They just needed to manage how others regarded you. That was the actual weapon. They told half-truths and exaggerated your quiet. They misconstrued your essay. They generated drama and then said you were the source of it. It was not about facts. It was all about the story. They were relying on the fact that no one would challenge it. What they didn't expect was that when someone finally chose to look into the source, the whole plot came apart. They did not anticipate these folks to speak out. Coworkers, friends, acquaintances, and even people you didn't know very well. They all gave a version of the truth. You're not who they said you were. And then the power changed. The untruth has lost its legs. The smear effort failed because it could not stand up to real-life evidence of your character. That's when things turned serious. They did not just lose control of the situation. They lost control of the tale. The false picture they created of you in private discussions and manipulative postings came tumbling down. And once they realized the truth, they couldn't stop seeing it. Your calm power, steady energy, and reluctance to participate in petty drama started to speak louder than their contrived displays. People who once supported them are now questioning everything. Why do they go so hard on someone who had done nothing except mind their business? Why do they attempt to portray that guy as a villain when all I have seen is peace? That level of skepticism is perilous for someone who depends on deception. They believe they were riding your collapse, but really they were riding their own exposure. They misjudged how loud the truth can become when it is validated by many independent sources. They didn't just lose your attention. They lost credibility because breaking the narrative is more than a defeat. It is a collapse. 6th, you've been living so truthfully that even strangers can attest you didn't have to give speeches about who you are. You didn't have to share inspiring words to demonstrate your good intentions. You just lived day by day, moment by moment. You were considerate of others even when it wasn't necessary. You refrained from unneeded drama. You didn't play politics or join cliques. You didn't over-explain yourself or put on a phony grin just to get by. You just opted to live in line with your principles. That type of modest constancy leaves a trail that even strangers could trace. That is what made you dangerous to your foes. Because when the investigator arrived, he expected mixed evaluations and minor shades, but what he discovered was something unique. Individuals stating they're simply regular individuals who had no idea you still had positive things to say. Not because you were showy, loud, or charming, but because your energy level was consistent. They couldn't locate anybody who said, "Oh yeah, they were always starting something," or "they irritated me." Even others who merely saw you in passing stated the same thing. They are calm, courteous, and keep to themselves. That's when those attempting to undermine you began to panic. They were depending on prejudice, misunderstanding, or someone eager to distort your image. But you didn't allow space for it. You gave them no inconsistencies to work with. Your name had a consistent frequency that resonated everywhere. There is no chaos or problems, just alignment. It wasn't flawless. It was about honesty. And this speaks louder than performance. Even those who were unaware of your complete tale could sense that your presence was genuine. That's the type of spiritual signature you can't fake. It is either there or not. And in your case, it came through loud and clear in the words of those who owed you nothing. So while your detractors were busy creating a scandal, you were quietly establishing a legacy of truth. When it counted the most, even strangers became witnesses. That's when they knew they couldn't overcome you, because how can you ruin someone whose life had already been protected before they spoke their mouths? Number 7, they used to mock your loneliness until it saved you. They ridiculed you for staying in your own lane. They saw your seclusion as weakness. They called you chilly, standoffish, and even haughty. You did not hang around in every circle. You didn't engage in phony talks. You didn't pursue acceptance. They laughed for a while over it. They saw your silence as evidence that you didn't belong. But now that the tables have turned, the loneliness they mocked has become your greatest safety. They were creating gossip-based ties and strategic alliances. You were built your life on the truth. You weren't relocating because of popularity. You moved with purpose. They had group conversations full of shady behavior and phony grins. You had tranquility, clarity, and constancy. They moved in packs to affirm one another's life. You traveled alone to protect your honesty. And now, when the investigator arrives and begins asking questions, they realize how terribly they misjudged. Your seclusion did not make you strange. It made you untouchable. You were not caught up in the drama. You were not in the midst of the chaos. You were not a member of the inner circle, where secrets were exchanged like cash. So there's nothing to connect you to the pandemonium. Your remoteness is acting as a barrier, preventing any effort to link your name to the gibberish. They assumed you were disconnected, but you were just discriminating. You did not isolate out of fear. You separated out of wisdom. You knew better than to associate your peace with folks who couldn't even handle their own. And now that the storm has arrived, everyone is racing to control the narrative, but you remain unaffected with a record that speaks for itself. That is the part that hurts the most. They spent all that time attempting to drag you into the dirt, assuming no one would trust your quiet. But now that the truth is out, that quiet has become the most audible voice in the room. It was not antisocial conduct. This was heavenly protection. And what was formerly seen as estrangement is now viewed as divine plan. They laughed back then, but no one is laughing now. Number 8. Good gossip was like a protective armor in a spiritual fight. You didn't know it at the time, but the way you held yourself in private was quietly piling up protection in public while your opponents plotted how to smear your reputation. People were already complimenting you behind your back for no more reason than they had seen your personality and couldn't deny it. You were not performing. You weren't attempting to seem ideal. You were simply being authentic, steady, and constant. And that quiet truthfulness evolved into something powerful, a spiritual protective armor. Your name began to work for you even when you were not present. The truth spread wider than the falsehoods ever could. People that inquire about you in the hopes of discovering anything sinister were unsuccessful. They discovered evidence. Evidence of how you handle people, how you remain cool while others panic, how you keep your head down and avoid little controversy. The rumors that came back were not malevolent. It was respectable. People were saying things like, "They have always been respectful. They kept to themselves, and I never heard them making a mess." And while your opponents were out here constructing a case against you, aiming to destroy your name, they had no clue they were heading into a courtroom where your life was already testifying for you without your knowledge. The individuals who have observed your development, elegance, and quiet strength, they became your witnesses. Real, substantial ones. People who had nothing to gain by protecting you, yet spoke the truth. That is why the assaults did not succeed. This is why the setup did not stick. Because this was more than simply a picture. It was spiritual battle. They were looking for your identify, name, and spirit. But your track record had already established Amadou. They had no idea that every honest contact you had, every time you decided not to react to hatred, and every time you remained grounded while being misunderstood, it all provided additional layers of safety around you. So, when it came to judging your character, their lies did not speak for themselves. It was your truth. And that truth didn't simply appear. It won the lawsuit. The decision was unequivocal, unshaken, and covered. Number 9, your humdrum existence was their biggest fear. They didn't understand you, so they labeled you uninteresting. You weren't seeking drama. You were not all over the place. You weren't trying to be noticed or make a scene. You stuck to your routine, your business remained consistent, and you maintained your peace. And because they couldn't figure you out or get you fired up, they convinced themselves you were simply unremarkable and forgettable. But now that they need chaos to tie to your name, that they were hoping for a receipt mess or something scandalous, they realize that your so-called boring life is exactly what is saving you. Your discipline has been a secret weapon. You never moved clumsily. You weren't doing anything you'd regret later. You were not involved in any shady dealings, strained friendships, or risky behavior. You didn't give them anything to work with. So when the investigator began looking, there was nothing there. There is no trail of destruction, hidden texts, or bad blood. Only peace, boundaries, and evidence of a person who has been solid for a long time. They failed to recognize that living a peaceful, grounded life is not boring. Rather, it is powerful, strategic, and serves as disguised protection. While they were busy performing for attention, you were laying the groundwork. And now that everything is being scrutinized closely, their chaos is exposing them, whereas your stillness is protecting you. They underestimated the threat your stability would pose because people like you are difficult to manipulate. You do not take the bait. You avoid getting caught up in emotionally charged traps. And this drives unstable individuals insane. They were expecting a flaw, some irresponsible behavior, and some skeletons in the closet. But what they discovered was a consistent, stable existence fashioned with purpose. They are now scrambling since their whole strategy relied on you having a history that they could weaponize. But your supposedly monotonous existence left them with nothing. And that type of nothing powerful is terrifying to someone who thrives on drama. You didn't just outlast them. You outdisciplined them. And now the thing they derided is the reason they can't touch you. Number 10, they wanted the investigator to validate the falsehood. He confirmed the light. They were not pursuing the truth. They were looking for affirmation that a falsehood they had previously determined was true. They wanted the investigator to corroborate the warped picture they had created of you in private. The troublemaker or manipulator. The one who couldn't have been as collected and clear as you looked to be. The purpose was not justice. It was a justification for their animosity. So they sat back, arrogant and assured, believing that the probe would do what their rumors could not. But they didn't realize it wasn't simply a human arrangement. It was a spiritual checkmate. This was not only about putting your reputation to the test. This was a moment of celestial harmony. The very individuals they expected to voice against you ended up validating the light you bring. They did not even need to lie for you. They just stated the truth. Your truth. That was more than enough. When the investigator began gathering information, he found no misunderstanding. He discovered clarity. He discovered consistency. He discovered tales of people who managed turmoil without revenge, who kept their heads down while being assaulted, and who never played dirty, even when things went nasty. He discovered character. When all the pieces came together, the reality was clear. It was crisp and distinctive. Grace, honesty, and brightness. To them, it felt like betrayal. They were counting on this becoming your undoing. Rather, it was your unveiling. They anticipated punishment. What they received was confirmation, not only that you were innocent, but that you were protected, chosen, held. That's what truly shocked them. Because when that final report arrived, it did more than just cleanse your name. It revealed their motives. That was the verdict. Not only were you found clean, but they were caught attempting to taint something they had no right to touch. This was more than simply a triumph for your reputation. It was a spiritual conclusion that rang truer than their lives ever could. They didn't just lose control. They were revealed beneath the truth. They cannot spin or bury numbers. They misjudge how deep your roots are. They misinterpreted your tranquility for passiveness. They assumed your silence indicated you had no support. They believed that since you weren't bright, loud, or always visible, you didn't have much weight behind your name. What they didn't comprehend was that you weren't relying on surface-level approval. You were anchored in a much deeper respect. People may be eager to speak about someone they admire, particularly if it makes them feel engaged or amused. However, when it comes to someone they respect, the game changes completely. Respect causes individuals to think twice. It causes them to reconsider before dragging your name into a quagmire. Because even those who don't rock with you understand that there is a boundary they can't pass without exposing themselves. That is what caused the entire thing to unravel. Your adversaries expected people to be eager to criticize you if they had a reason. They were counting on others to pour gasoline to the fire. However, they encountered opposition. Not everyone they contacted was a fan of yours, but they refused to lie to you. They couldn't fabricate a story that didn't fit what they'd witnessed. Because even if someone didn't like you personally, they couldn't refute the way you held yourself, handled pressure, and continually demonstrated integrity. Your roots grew deeper than their reach. You'd sowed seeds in quiet, earned confidence via acts, and established a presence that could not be disturbed by rumors. So when it came time to attempt to distort your image, the soil rejected the deception. People recalled how you handled them, how you remained calm, and how you never resorted to petty games. That memory became your defense, and it went deep. They wanted to see you unravel. They didn't anticipate the community, some silent, others distant, to discreetly defend you since you weren't simply cool. You were respected. And when falsehoods sought to infiltrate your tale, that respect served as a barrier. It stopped the rumor. It stopped the momentum. And it reminded your adversaries of something they had forgotten. Real ones do not fall easy. They remain firmly planted. Number, they converted a character checkpoint into a courtroom. But you had the receipts. They assumed that inquiring around about you would result in something sensational. They thought that the more individuals they questioned, the more probable it was that someone, anybody, would have a negative response. They didn't know they weren't simply doing a character check. They had unwittingly opened a courtroom. How about your life? It had already submitted its evidence. Every instance in which you chose peace over retribution earned a receipt. Another receipt for every time you showed someone respect, even if they didn't deserve it. Every time you came up, you remained consistent, set limits, and moved with elegance. That was documentation, silent, wordless, but strong. You didn't need a defensive squad. You were the evidence. Your behaviors, habits, and previous judgments have already provided testimony on your side. So when the questions began to circulate, when people contacted you, and your name came up, what they discovered was not drama, but documentation, patterns, repetition, integrity. People began answering with variations of the same thing. They are solid. They do not get embroiled in foolishness. They don't speak negatively about others. And that's when your adversaries recognized they were no longer in charge of the story. They had not begun an inquiry. They'd started a study, and the outcome wasn't what they expected. They wanted a chaos. But your discipline had been loud even in stillness. You had no need to rush. There's no need to explain yourself since the job has already been done. You had been consistent even while no one was looking. You were measured, even if you were misinterpreted. You were polite, even when you had every reason to lash out. That's the part they didn't foresee. They assumed they'd catch you sliding. Instead, they stumbled over your steadiness. They focused the spotlight on you, expecting to find defects. But the light has just shown your reality. You did not need to bring out receipts. They were already there, sitting silently in the hearts and thoughts of everyone who saw your movements. You did not win by defending yourself. You won because your life had already answered the questions long before they were posed. A number. They're terrified since their strategy was based on your quiet. They based their whole approach on the assumption that you would remain silent forever, that you would not defend yourself, that you would not rectify the falsehoods. They perceived your stillness for powerlessness, while in fact it was discipline. It was wisdom. There was restraint. You were not being passive. You were being strategic. And now that the truth has been revealed and the inquiry is complete, they are panicking. Not because you said anything, but because you didn't need to. They were depending on you to respond. They wanted you to strike out, seem unstable, and give them something they could twist. But you didn't give them anything. You did not play their game. You let your character do the talking. And it is what is causing them to unravel. Because the minute people began speaking openly about who you are, all they had created crumbled beneath the weight of your silence. They spoke half-truths and wove stories behind your back, believing that the falsehoods would spread quicker than your honesty. But they didn't expect anyone to pay attention. Your constancy had already left an effect. Your article had already raised eyebrows. Your absence of drama had already raised doubts. So when it came time for others to talk about you, the truth was revealed without you having to raise a finger. Now, those who attempted to bury you are the ones who seem exposed. They're trying to explain themselves, changing their tale, and reliving discussions they never expected to have again. It's ironic that you never stated their names. You never clapped back. You did not condemn them, humiliate them, or even mention the smear campaign. And yet, they're unraveling in real time because there's something extremely unnerving about being exposed by your own acts while the person you attempted to harm never says anything. Silence has a greater impact than any confrontation. You didn't need vengeance. You did not need to defend yourself. They exposed their identity while attempting to assassinate your character. You remained silent as they gave out the proof themselves. Everyone now sees it, even the quiet they once derided. That was the same quiet that gave you power and cost others theirs. A number. You were the narrative surprise that no one saw coming. They had the whole narrative planned out in their imaginations. You were the issue, the troublemaker, the one who was too calm, too assured, and too unique to be trusted. So they paint you as the villain and propagate that image of you via whispers, body language, and well-chosen shades. They assumed they were crafting your collapse as a predictable narrative. What they didn't comprehend was that life, particularly divine timing, doesn't always go as planned. They expected everyone to believe them without inquiry. They anticipated their version of you to stay, since they said it many times. But as the genuine comments started flowing in, the investigation began, and people were questioned about who you are. Not in gossip circles, but in a manner that matters. The whole plot fell apart. You were not the villain. You were not involved in the mayhem. You were the one who kept it together while they stirred the pot. And the audience, the people watching, the ones they attempted to deceive, began to see it plainly. You become the narrative twist not by arguing, defending, or explaining, but by just being constant and being yourself. The truth began to emerge unexpectedly. People they expected to join their drama turned around and revealed the reality. The narrative switched, and they lost control. And this is what they were truly unprepared for. The investigator was not just a professional asking questions. That was a heavenly interruption, a supernatural stop inserted into the tale to prevent a lie from becoming true. Something intervened just as the illusion was ready to take hold, putting an end to it. Not because you asked for justice, but because it was already written into your fate. You were never intended to be ruined by their perception of you. They believed they were reporting the story. However, they were just background noise in your narrative. You were not a plot twist in their narrative. They were the storyline of your breakthrough. And now the true tale is revealing. And it doesn't end in the manner they intended. They attempted to reduce you to a rumor. They attempted to redefine your identity via falsehoods, jealousy, and warped tales. They planned murmurs behind your back, believing they'd be loud enough to tarnish your reputation. However, it was not their remarks that ultimately stuck out. This was your life. Everything they did was based on the assumption that no one would dig further, that people would take their portrayal of you at face value. However, the instant the truth was introduced into the room, the whole illusion collapsed. You were not only found clean, but also appreciated. You were not just unspoiled, but also adored. Because this was more than simply a social test. It was a spiritual unfolding. Your quiet did not make you weak. It made you untouchable. Your loneliness was not isolation. It was insulation. Your boring existence was everything, but it was confirmation that you had been moving with discipline, honesty, and divine timing all along. And when the sunlight eventually shone on you, it did not reveal any scandals. It showed light. The investigator did not just ask inquiries. That moment was preordained. It was supernatural intervention, a spiritual audit to halt the falsehood before it became harmful. And when the reports were accurate and strong, they did more than merely establish your innocence. They verified your call. Now, those who plotted against you were faced with the consequences of their own assumptions. They were ready to see you collapse. They weren't expecting you to stand without raising a finger, tossing dirt back, or saying anything. You won with evidence, not noise. And that is the power of living in harmony. Your life does not need defense since it is already giving testimony on your favor. They assumed they were creating your finale, but all they did was speed up your breakthrough. So let this be the message. Your persona serves as your disguise. Your truth is expressed via your witness and quiet. That was the plan that surprised them all. They sent someone to uncover the worst in you, but the world found the greatest. This message resonated with your spirit. If it verified what you already felt in your spirit, don't simply accept it. Move with it. Subscribe to the channels to ensure you never miss another word designed to strengthen your discernment and validate your path. Leave a comment below. Let me know how this affected you, since your voice is important in this place. Like the video. If you feel seen, heard, or understood today, share it with someone who has been waging a quiet struggle. Their character has already won. They need to know they are not alone. This is not simply material, it's confirmation. This is not simply a video. It's vindication wrapped in truth. And if you know you're walking with purpose, this is the group for you. Welcome home. Stay grounded and radiant. continue to be picked. God bless you.